talk this evening about something that came up in a discussion at the mealtime. Someone was asking about the five aggregates, the five khandha, and I don't think I've spoken on that in a while. It's an important topic, so I'll discuss the five khandha this evening. The five khandha, or aggregates as it's often translated, particularly in some older books it's translated as the five bundles or the five heaps. These are the constituents of body and mind. It's the system the Buddha used in the suttas to explain human existence, the component parts of a human being, a body-mind system, an organism. A simpler analysis is to speak about the nama-rupa as two sides, the body and the mind. Nama literally means name or designation, and rupa is form or material. And it's a term for body and mind, nama-rupa. And in vipassana meditation, it's one of the important stages when the meditator is able to clearly distinguish nama and rupa. It may seem obvious, the distinction between body and mind, but to the ordinary person with an untrained mind, they get muddled up. We mistake our sensations and our feelings for body, and we confuse the body with the mind. So body or rupa khandha, the aggregate of form, is the first usually listed. It's the coarsest, the densest aggregate. It's materiality. It's the aspect of a being that is matter. And in the Buddhist system, based on ancient Indian physics, they talk about four elements: earth, air, fire, water. And it's a useful meditation. The meditation on the four elements is a good body meditation. The Burmese master Pa Auk speaks a lot about four elements as a meditation. Understanding the four elements, it's first of all important not to take the names naively. They don't refer to ordinary earth, air, fire, water. They're more like mnemonic labels. They can be thought of as qualities or energies, or in a system developed in the Burmese Abhidhamma, they talk about them in a kind of atomic theory as kalapas, tiny transitory particles that flash in and out of existence of four kinds, and different combinations make the things we know in the world. Earth is the quality of extension or taking up of space or impenetrability. Water is shape or form, because water flows into a vessel. It takes the shape of the vessel, so it's the analogy used is water, but the matter takes different shapes, and that it's one of the qualities. Air is motion. It's the quality of motion. And in the ancient Indian physiology, the understanding of how the body worked, they had kind of a pneumatic theory of muscles, that when you moved your arm or your leg, the air element was flowing into the muscle and causing it to expand or contract. So I saw in one of the Burmese meditation books that that if you find yourself slumping in meditation all the time, it's because you're low in the air element. You need to raise your air element. It's like you take a bicycle pump to your lower spine and pump it up. The air element is the sense of motion, and fire element is heat, energy, the kind of potential of doing work, and also of consumption, like being burnt up. You know? So these four elements combine in different ratios in different actual physical substances, and they compose the body of a human being, and different parts of the body have different degrees of this. The way Pa'ak talks about doing a meditation on the four elements is to look at the body and notice elements in their presence or their strength or their weakness. They're always to some degree present. So fire element, the opposite is coldness. So you notice if the heat or cold in the body. Earth element is when it's strong is like stiffness, heaviness, and when it's weak is like softness, pliability. Notice the different elements. Another way of looking at the body is the 32 parts of the body, is to analyze the body in terms of its constituent parts: hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, blood, sinews, bone marrow, and so on. There's a list of 32 parts to visualize the body as a three-dimensional collection of oddly shaped bits and fluids. This is a meditation that helps to develop non-attachment to the body. In terms of distinguishing nama from rupa, one of the sayings in the Vipassana tradition is that nama is that which moves and rupa is that which does not move. So the body is inert. In other words, the mind is that which is active. The other four aggregates, the four khandha, are all purely mental, but obviously mind and body are related. They affect each other. They're mutually effective upon one another. If you have done an injury to your body, then it distresses the mind. You feel it in the mind, right? Likewise, if you're consumed with strong emotions, you'll have effects on the body. People get ulcers from constant worry, just things like that. The mind does affect the body, and the body affects the mind, but they're separate. The first mental aggregate, which you could say is the lowest or the coarsest of the mental aggregates, is feeling, vedana. And this is the emotive response to stimulus. And it's to be understood as very simple. What we call emotions in English are actually very complex formations of different combinations of things, but Vedana just refers to the very simple, immediate, automatic response to stimulus as being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And that of course, can be on a spectrum. Things can be mildly irritating, or they can be agonizingly painful, right? But they're both unpleasant sensation. And they can be analyzed as bodily or mental. They're all mental ultimately, but according to their source. There's bodily pain and pleasure means that it arises from a bodily source, or mental pain and pleasure is a mental source. According to the Abhidhamma theories, of all the senses, it's only the sense of touch that arouses Vedana immediately without mediation through mental processing. In other words, if you if you touch a hot iron, it's immediately painful. It's not a judgment call involved. It's immediately painful. But for vision or sound, smell and taste, it's more subtle. First, they're all immediately neutral, but then it's mediated by the mind, and we have associations that we like. We see certain things are beautiful and certain things are ugly. Certain sounds are pleasant and other ones are unpleasant, and so on. And this is a secondary step. It's processed by the mind first, and then the pleasure or pain is felt. But the immediate stimulus is always neutral. That's why we have the saying in English that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That's why there's a lot of subjectivity and differences of opinion. Some people like certain kinds of music, and other people feel this is horrible. How could you listen to that? Or same with art, with paintings and so on. Or food. Some people love certain flavors and other people find this horrible. And it's because the immediate sensation is neutral. But nobody likes putting their hand on a hot iron. It's painful because it's felt immediately with the body. The body immediately sends that signal to the mind. This is pleasant, this is unpleasant, without it having mediated as a mental object. But the Vedana is always mental. It's a mental component. If you put a piece of stick into the fire, it doesn't have any feeling of pain. But if you put your hand in there, there's pain because of mind, of consciousness. The two aggregates of vijnana and sanya are very hard to distinguish from one another. They work so closely together. Vijnana is the aggregate of consciousness. It is that which cognizes. The definition given in Pali, in the Visuddhimagga and other places, is circular. Really, and this is the same with a few of these, but it's kind of funny. It's this consciousness is that which cognizes, and cognizes in the Pali is a verbal form of the noun of consciousness. So vijnana is that which does vijnana. So it doesn't help you because it's subtle, and it's difficult for people to grasp, perhaps, because it's so simple and immediate. It's not complicated at all. It's not an issue of complication that makes it hard to grasp. It's so immediate. It's like a fish. If you asked a fish for the definition of water, they're completely immersed in water, so they're unable to distinguish it from anything else. They couldn't define it. So consciousness is that which knows. It's the immediate experience of knowing. And it operates through the medium of the six senses. There's the five bodily senses and there's the mind sense. It takes mental objects. So with the example of the eye, when there's a stimulus to the eye, there must be light and an object that the light strikes, and then the eye perceives color and shape. This is vijnana. And this is as far as vijnana goes. It perceives color and shape. So it has this experience. And this is the difference between human or animal consciousness and something like a camera. A camera sees color and shape, but it doesn't have any experience of that. There's nothing there. There's no one home, right? But human being has an experience. It knows. Knows not in the sense of understanding, but of the sense of experiencing. And this is constant. This is going on all the time. And at each moment there's an object from one of the six senses. And this is another idea from Abhidhamma, that consciousness occurs momentarily and only at one sense base at a time. So we think we're seeing and hearing at the same time. We're not. We're actually just flitting back and forth between the two so quickly, and our ordinary mind just kind of blurs them all together. But in a momentary experience, there's only one object at a time. And if you get good at vipassana, you begin to see that. You begin to see the mind working in a more sort of digital way than an analog way. You see a sort of like experience it like a strobe light, one moment experience after another. So the eye consciousness only knows color and shape. Ear consciousness only knows frequency and amplitude, pitch and loudness. And the tongue and the nose only know different chemical sensations. And the body only knows pressure, heat, and so on. Consciousness doesn't see a tree or a car or a house or a person. It just sees color and shape. This is the role of the aggregate of perception, sanya, that it works in immediate tandem with consciousness to make sense of the experience. And these two working together, in a sense, they create the world. The world that we actually live in, the world that we experience, is created by consciousness and sanya working together. Consciousness, jnana, just feeds in a stream of raw, unanalyzed, unparsed data that sanya then makes sense of and distinguishes. And sanya can be loose or precise, and it can vary between individuals, and it can be educated. You can learn to distinguish different objects in a more refined way. If you look at a pile of rocks and you don't know anything about geology, you just see a pile of rocks. You go to college and study geology for a few years, and then you'll be seeing schist and gneiss and basalt and so on. A good example of perception is sanya, is recognizing faces. If you're seeing a crowd of people and they're all just faces to you, just human faces, but then suddenly you see your buddy in the crowd, that it stands out, and I know this is Joe, and so that's perception that has distinguished that, right? Because your perception has been trained. At one time you didn't know Joe, so he would have just been someone in the crowd, but now you're trained to recognize that face. That sanya has been refined in that area. And sanya can be fooled. All kinds of optical illusions and auditory illusions, and mis-see and mishear things. Right? The classic example always given in the text is mistaking a piece of rope for a snake. Right? Because the person is, out of self-preservation, they're on the lookout for snakes, and they see at the corner of the eye, they see a piece of rope, and they see it as a snake, and they look around, oh no, it's just a piece of rope. And you can think of many examples of how you can misperceive things, and you can play with perception, and people do. If you've ever been relaxed and outdoors looking at the clouds and seeing shapes and figures in the clouds, that's perception playing around with the shape and being free with it. The last of the 5 aggregates is sankharas, mental formations. The word sankhara means compounded thing, and it's used in a different context. in the most general context, all phenomena in the conditioned world are sankharas because they arise from conditionality. But in terms of the formula of the 5 aggregates, it refers to the mental processes that are algorithmic in nature, I would say. Like the formations in the mind, things that the mind is doing, concocting. There's a list of them in the Abhidhamma. It comes to 50 sankharas, and there are things like will or intention is a very important one. Also thought, vitakka and vichara, and pliability of mind, and qualities like metta and loving kindness and so on. In the original text, the oldest Abhidhamma text, the list was open-ended. It ended with a phrase, and whatever other mental states arise at that time. And it was only later in the commentaries they closed it at 50, but it was originally intended to be an open-ended, broad category of all mental formations, all mental processes. In a very general way, you could say there are thoughts and emotions. There are sankharas. And from the point of view of vijnana, they're objects. They're the objects of vijnana. Vijnana is the subject, that which knows. And when it's knowing in the mode of mental sense, the sixth sense, the mind sense, the objects are sankharas. They're the phenomena of the mind. They're objective to vijnana or citta. And this is important to distinguish. Tomorrow we're going to, those who are participating in the meditation tomorrow, we'll talk about vipassana. We'll try to do vipassana tomorrow. And that is being clear about the objects which arise to the mind. And that's why it's useful to understand these categories so they don't become muddled up. In Satipatthana Sutta, which is considered the locus classicus of vipassana meditation, the Buddha talks about knowing body in body, knowing feeling in feeling, and so on. And it's always emphasized in the vipassana tradition to know one thing at a time, not to muddle it all up together. Right? You're trying to be precise with your noticing. So to notice pleasant feeling as pleasant feeling, and not to confuse it with the thought or the bodily sensation that caused the pleasant feeling. Now they're separate things, to know them separately. You give an example, you're hot, it's a hot day, but suddenly there's a cool breeze, and you feel a cool breeze on the body, and it's pleasant, it feels good. So what's happening is that first there's a purely physical sensation of coolness. Then the mental sense of pleasant arises, a pleasant sensation. So it's first is rupa, then it's vedana, and it's vijnana that knows all this, that's taking it in. And perception might get involved too, if by recognizing it as a breeze, calling it a breeze. Whereas from the point of view of immediate knowing, it's not a breeze, it's just a cool sensation on the body. Right? And this is something that's important to distinguish, and tricky. It's tricky to distinguish consciousness and perception. Now, I had a meditator once, I was under my guidance here, and he came and told me in the morning he thought his meditation was going really well. He says there was a bird singing outside my kuti, and I was right there with the bird. And I said, well, you're not there yet, because you didn't hear a bird, you heard a high-pitched sound. and you imagined a bird, you perceived a bird. Right? There's a difference. The consciousness just hears a high-pitched sound, and perception qualifies that, recognizes it as a bird. And same with vision. If we look at a bird, all we're seeing is color and shape. That's all we're cognizing. All the eye consciousness is experiencing, and then the mind quality of perception recognizes that as a bird. Then Vedana arises, and that can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. If you're very equanimous, everything is neutral. But if your mind is still jumping from attachment to aversion, you feel pleasant or unpleasant. You're unpleasant. I hate those damn birds. You feel the unpleasant feeling, or pleasant feeling. Oh, I love those birds. This is a reaction to it. And then sankhara comes in, thought. You start thinking about birds. The whole process, everything's interrelated. It all feeds on each other, and it runs along as a process. There's a neat analogy in Visuddhimagga. Take an example of a coin. To a small child, the coin is just a shiny object, and that's vijnana. Rupa is the coin itself, and then the child holding it is just a shiny object. That's vijnana. Then an ordinary adult person picks up the coin and he says, "Oh, this is a 1 kahapana piece." So he's perception. But then a coin dealer, a money changer, he picks up the coin and he says, "This is a coin from Kosala, minted in the reign of King Bimbisara. It's 96% pure gold. It's worth 10% more than a Kosalan coin." And this is sankhara. It's all the thought process and the knowledge and kicking in. And this is how we successfully deal with objects. I left out Vedana in that one. I thought maybe you say Vedana is the guy's wife who sees the coin and says, "Oh boy, I could buy a new dress." It feels happy. So these 5 aggregates are all that constitute the body and mind, and there's nothing else besides. And this is one of the values of the analysis, and this is expressed in the Milinda Panya as the simile of a chariot. King Milinda came to see the monk Nagasena and asked him questions, and he asked him about the nature of self and not self, and the monk said to the king, "How did you get here today?" And he says, "I came in my chariot." And he says, "If we were to take your chariot and bust it in pieces and put the wheel over here and the front board over there, the back board over there, and so on, where would you find the essence of chariot?" Well, there isn't any. And there's some more kind of Socratic dialogue back and forth, and he gets the king to define a chariot as just a name, just a designation given to this pile of parts when they're arranged in a certain way. Then we can call it chariot. And he says, so it is a human being. There's no essence, there's no self-existent entity, there's no svabhava, own essence in the process. There's just body, mind, perception, feeling, and mental formations. And you can analyze each of these further, keep breaking it up, and nowhere will you find anywhere a self. In ancient Indian philosophical terms, you won't find a Atman. There's no, this is what in Buddhism we say anatta, no self. It's just a combination of processes going on. So if you look at them in a proper way, which you're trained to do in a methodical way in Vipassana meditation, you're trying to look at the processes of body and mind objectively, dispassionately, equanimously, precisely, then nowhere do you find a self. It's just not evident. You don't need it. It's an unrequired hypothesis. All that exists at any moment, in the last analysis, all that exists is mind and the object of mind. And the object of mind is one of the other aggregates. The Abhidhamma analyzes things a little bit differently, and the distinction becomes a bit more clear in the Abhidhamma analysis. It divides all reality into 4 categories. There's Nibbana, the unconditioned, and then there's the 3 conditioned categories. There's body, rupa, more matter. This is more general than just a human person. It's everything. So rupa, which in the human case is the body. And then there's 2 other categories, citta and cittasika. Citta is the knowing mind, so it's a generalization of the idea of vijnana. It's the universal principle of knowing mind in its own essence, pure mind. And cittasika is derived from citta. It means that which is with citta or is associated with citta. Thus, all the objective qualities of mind. So that's all the 3 mental aggregates other than vijnana in the sutta system. So, sankharas, vedana, and sanya. They're all objects known to citta. So at any moment, citta is taking an object. And that's all it does. Right? This is important to remember and understand, that citta just has this one function. It simply takes object. So citta is never happy, it's never sad, it cannot be purified, it cannot be defiled. It's just as it is. It's not affected by any of these things. It knows them all as objects. So if you're centered in citta, then everything is clear. All the objects are clear and clearly distinguished. And if the objects are clearly distinguished, then it naturally centers the mind in citta. What we're trying to avoid is spinning out into the periphery by identifying with the objects. Once you have the feeling, I am sad or I am happy, you've lost the game. You're off. You're spinning out. But if you notice there is happiness, there is sadness, that's a different thing. Then you're still centered. So in conclusion, I just say it's a worthwhile and useful endeavor to try and distinguish the different qualities of body and mind, and to do so as clearly and precisely as you're able to.